Hey, everybody. I would say happy Tuesday, but yes, I know it's Thursday. I'm sorry. We're 2 days late, but it's 2020, so I'm hoping you can just forgive us this time. We're so pumped about this episode. It is so awesome. It's a long one too, but it is so worth all of the minutes that this is. We got the amazing opportunity to sit down with Erin Smith. She is an AMI birth to 3 trainer. She's also primary trained, and she's currently working in a primary classroom. I've always been obsessed with the birth to 3 A to I classroom. I mean, if I could get another training, that's what I would get in an absolute minute. I've just always just been super interested in it. And this interview is absolutely phenomenal. We talk about so many amazing things, and it was so fun for Jamie and I not to talk about elementary because that's all we do. But it's so great. So I really hope that you guys enjoy it. And I mentioned this in the podcast, but if anybody has any birth to 3 related questions, definitely email us at allthingsmontessoripod@gmail.com, and we will include Erin in that email, and she will definitely get back to you. As always, this episode is brought to you by Patreon. Woohoo! We have a new patron to announce. Leilani, she joined our ranks. Thank you so much for becoming a patron of All Things Montessori. We appreciate it so very much. I'm actually looking at a stack of envelopes on my desk right now. I'm about to send out some stickers to our lovely patrons that joined us. If you want to become a patron like these amazing human beings, just go on over to patreon.com. You can search All Things Montessori, and then you can pick which tier you would like to be, and I will link it at the bottom of this episode as always. This episode is also brought to you by Sapling Supply. I wanted to read one of the testimonials of Sapling Supply because I think it really speaks to how amazing this company is. Sapling Supply has created beautiful furniture for my classroom for years. These pieces show a thoughtful design that combines durability and lasting beauty. In my 25 plus years of working in Montessori classrooms, I have bought furniture from most of the established Montessori companies. The Sapling Supply design and function have outshined them all. The craftsmanship and the attention to the smallest detail have ensured that these pieces only become more beautiful with time and wear. The innovative design and durability will keep bringing me back to Sapling Supply. Okay, so that's all anyone needs to know. This company is incredible. So if you're looking to outfit your classroom, perhaps your home environment, or you're just looking for a new lap desk like I have, believe me, I use it all the time. It's amazing. So go ahead. You can go on over to saplingsupply.net. I have it linked at the bottom of this episode as well. And if you want to get anything on their website, you can get 10% off site-wide with our podcast code ATM10. We love Sapling Supply, so go ahead and check them out. Well, I'm delighted that we have a special guest here with us today. We have Erin Smith, who's an AMI birth to 3 trainer of teachers. Erin's also primary trained, currently working in a primary classroom, and has a 2-year-old of her own. So she really lives and breathes this work right now of working with children under the age of 3 also. And Erin's based in the Denver area. And we're just thrilled to be able to have you on, Erin, and just share with us the real magic behind the approach, the Montessori approach to children under the age of 3. We have a tendency to focus on elementary because that's where we've spent our careers. And so we're thrilled to hear about this vital age span and what we can do to support children in their development.
Well, thank you so much, Jamie. And I'm a fan of the podcast. So it's actually been a really fun way because I'm not elementary trained you're making elementary and that experience so much more accessible, I think, to a lot of people who are interested in learning. So I appreciate all of your elementary experience that you bring to the podcast. And I'm really happy to be here.
Aw. Well, thanks so much for being a fan and for being on. One thing we like to do whenever we have somebody on is we love to hear about their Montessori story and how they got to where you are now. So tell us.
Sure. Yeah, that's one of my favorite things too. I love sort of hearing how people came to the work. Mine is maybe a little quirky, which kind of fits for people who know me. But I had no intention of going to education. I didn't have a negative experience with education, but I would literally, people would say to me when I got to college age, they'd say, what about being a teacher? You seem to really like children. And I'd say, yeah, I do really like children. And that's why I would never be a teacher. And I had this impression that like teachers just kind of wanted to boss small people around. That was like, for whatever reason, that's kind of how I viewed education. And so really had no intention of going into education, but always worked with kids as a nanny and things like that. And as I got closer to graduating from college, I had planned to go to art school and basically needed to save up money to do it. And so I started thinking about next steps. I had a lot of friends. I went to college in sort of the DC area in Northern Virginia, and a lot of my friends were working in nonprofits and were into music and art and living good lives. But it kind of felt like I feared that I was going to get out of college and then spend all of my time with people who looked and acted and thought the same way I did. And I really didn't want that. And so I was like, I want to live in a community. I want to like serve people. It's very fourth plane for once I learned about the planes, I was like, okay, this is, I just had this desire to be part of a community of very different people. And somehow, I have no idea how, but what came into my head was like, I'm going to join a commune, an intentional community. And so I visited some in Virginia, and sadly, I wasn't able to join because I had student loans, and so they couldn't take on anyone with student loans. But, and it's like, I kind of want to go back because this woman changed the trajectory of my life, and I never met her. I was kind of touring this commune, and they said, oh, and this is the building where so-and-so worked. She uses the Montessori method with some migrant workers where English is their second language, adults, to teach them to read and write in English. And so that just kind of rang a bell in my mind. I had somehow heard the word Montessori. I didn't see the space. I had no idea what it meant. But when I realized I had to kind of regroup and make a new plan, I started looking into Montessori and realized that there was another way possibly to be with children. I assumed that Montessori, even though that was my intro, I assumed it was really for like 3 to 6 year olds. And I ended up, actually, my mom found that there was an organization hiring for Montessori assistants. And they said, well, you would be working with infants. And I didn't know what that meant or what that would look like. But I really needed a job. And I was excited about it. I fell in love with it. I just, it was such an amazing, peaceful, fun and respectful way to be with children. And I also really fell in love with the kind of adults that were drawn to Montessori. And just, I kind of felt like I found my people. So I continued in that work. I eventually started working with toddlers. And then I kind of wanted to know where they went next. And I had no intention of ever working with 3 to 6 year olds, but I just wanted to learn about 3 to 6. And so I did my 3 to 6 training in the summers while I was teaching. And then, the way I've described my whole journey with Montessori is like doors just sort of open in certain directions. It's like the universe has sort of pointed me towards certain things. And so over the years, I've worked in 3 to 6. Again, I've worked with toddlers. I've worked with parents. I became a coach at a certain point, working with adults, and then a consultant, and then a trainer. So I've done sort of all of those things, and still love working with children. So part of my return to the classroom, which has just began this fall, is like wanting to somehow figure out a way to combine working with children and continuing to work with adults. Because I really find both experiences really incredible and kind of nourishing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, what a awesome story, a commune. Oh,
Yeah.
I don't even know what that would be like. I love that.
Yeah, it's really strange to like think, like I said, I should go back and like knock on that woman's door and be like, you don't know me. We've never even met, but I know a Montessori trainer basically because of you, because I heard about
Yeah.
you. Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty
How
crazy.
cool is that? Oh, I love that. Oh man.
And it's just all too often that that the story is stumbling upon Montessori education, right? Like I mean, hopefully it becomes more of like a clear destination for people in the future. It's amazing how hard it is to find, even still.
Yes. Well, and
Yeah.
it's funny you say that because luckily my mom, who, she's actually a big traditional education fan. She's not a like Montessori proponent. So it's really funny that she sort of, she's like, there's this organization that's hiring, because I was just kind of like cold calling. Like I was emailing Montessori schools and just being like, will someone talk to me? Because I couldn't figure out, this was in like 2001. And I just couldn't figure out how to learn more. And I think we've come a long way. And it's like, things like social media are sort of a mixed blessing, but they are, people do have more access. But I totally agree, Jamie. It needs to be more accessible for people, because it is such an amazing method.
So, Erin, could you talk about, when we talk about elementary, we kind of break down some of the key components of the classroom, or we hone in on something really specific to that age group. Could you talk a little bit about birth to 3 and just the key elements or key components of the environment in that age range?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. Well, you think about this period from birth to 3. If you think of a newborn and a 3-year-old, it's incredible what happens in those first 3 years. And Montessori, people often talk about how she was a medical doctor, but they sort of skip over the fact that she was also an anthropologist. And she looked at human beings and sort of our history and how we evolve the way that we have. And she recognized that, a newborn is incredibly dependent. In Montessori, independence is the big buzzword, but there is no independence when you're a newborn. But that is so necessary for all of the amazing development that's to come, because of, just the way that our brains develop in that first year, especially, but in the first 3 years of life, and the way that we kind of use our environment and our surroundings in those early years to literally construct our movement patterns, our language, the way we think, our emotions. All of that is kind of interwoven with the environment from 0 to 3. So for a young child, one of the most important things, and I think something that really stands out in a Montessori environment, is freedom of movement. So you don't see things like cribs or bouncy seats, or for the most part. And I always like to kind of do a caveat, because like I was teaching a parent-infant class and a woman called and said, can I bring my baby even if I have a crib at my house? And I was like, yes, of course. So it's like, and I loved this class because parents would be like, okay, I use a bouncy seat so I can take a shower, and we would talk about this idea of like, yeah, if you're in a family, like you have to weigh, many different things. So it's not black and white. I'll say that. But in general, you want babies to have the freedom to move. So they're not in what we call baby containers, because that forces their bodies into a position, one that's often quite unnatural. And then the other, issue with it is that it limits what their natural movement can be. It's a little bit like, this is going to sound very strange, but I love historical fiction. And when people talk about when women wore tight corsets, like it changed the way their bodies moved and the way, it limited what they could do. And so it is kind of like corseting your child when they spend a lot of time in, a swing or a bouncy seat or something like that. It actually limits the way that they'll be able to move independently. So lots of freedom of movement, also very minimal things. So, one, because if you have this baby or this young child moving around freely, you have to make sure they're safe. And so you're going to limit what you have for them. But also, their bodies are kind of like playgrounds. I always say that, like there's so much that they get just from moving themselves around, just by making sounds. They don't need a ton of external stimulation. So you might have, for a young baby, a mobile that's over, a little movement mat, so they can kind of freely move their arms and legs, and they have something to look at some of the time. But you wouldn't leave that mobile out all day long every day. You would kind of have it out for maybe 10 minutes and then, hang it on the wall or something like that. So pretty limited.
I really appreciate the sort of your sort of realism too about the movement and containers. Like it's obviously we don't need the super saucer things with the 20 different light up things and stuff like that. But it also is, realistic when you're balancing your life at home, or when you have, as I did with my second child, a child who can roll herself anywhere she wants at 4 months old.
Yep.
Like she is the reason we did get a few containers, not for living in, but just so we could like take a shower or breathe for a few minutes.
Yep.
Because she could get into everything. So it's nice to hear that that I could be a decent Montessori mom, but also occasionally rely on a handful of things like that for just getting through daily life.
Absolutely. Well, and the thing that you're saying, Jamie, is you observed your child, which means you had a slightly different environment for each of your children, right? Based on them. And so I think that's huge. And also what gets lost sometimes, but is essential, especially I think in 0 to 3 and in the home, is it isn't just a child's space. It's the whole family space. And we know it's not healthy. It wouldn't be healthy for a child to come into like a Montessori classroom and think it belonged only to them. In the same way, the family home doesn't belong only to the child. So I think like some of those compromises, like it feels like a compromise. And I'm with you, Jamie, because I've had my own versions of those things where I'm like, oh my God, am I the worst Montessori mother? And it's just like, but to remind myself that this is part of, living in what we call the first community of the family, is that everybody's compromising a little bit. And of course you want children, your child to be able to develop as fully as possible, but just knowing that like, that's also a healthy thing to experience, that we all, adapt as part of the family.
Yeah.
So I think, and for me, I think it's easy to get into a couple of things. One is a very judgmental space from a Montessori perspective of, it has to be this way to be truly Montessori. And also to get into a very materialistic space. So it's like, you have to have the right weaning table and chair, and you have to have the right kind of shelves, and for me that's totally at odds with the idea that this is a universal approach. So I always say like you should be able to be a Montessori parent living in your car, and if you can't, then Montessori needs to change, because then it's not universal. It's not really all children, it's only children who are lucky enough to have a home, so
yeah.
I think there's so much flexibility, and over the years I've become more open to that. I think, when you're first trained and you're like in your classroom, or you're working with your own child, and you just, it's this desire to have high fidelity, to really do what you've learned. But I think part of what the beauty and the sort of alchemy of Montessori is really following the child and letting their personality unfold and your relationship unfold, and that's another reason, like I said, the environment's simple. I always tell parents, don't invest a ton of money in anything, because you don't know your child yet, and you have no idea what their interests will be. And so, I've tried to follow that advice. And the one piece of like an infant material I got for my son was the box with ball and tray. It's sometimes called an object permanence box. And it's this great toy that's for when they're about 7 to 9 months. And baby puts the ball in the hole. Usually an adult does it first. And then it comes out the tray. It disappears for a second in this box and it comes out onto the tray. And it's sort of helping with this idea that something can still exist even when we don't see it. A very natural way to do that we have done as humans forever is play peekaboo. You do that with a baby and it's that same idea. And I thought every child I've ever worked with has loved this. So this is, it's worth it. My son did use it, but he used it what I call as a skateboard, the same way he used everything else. He just like would push himself around, like he would push it and it helped him to like slide around on the floor. So I was like, gosh, even this one thing, it's like my son is such a great bit of karma because it's just like he upends all of my beliefs about things. But yeah, I mean, basically, if you're looking at Montessori, if you're wanting to, have a Montessori home or something, you look at the basics of what you need. So sleeping, eating, moving, and physical care, which is things like getting diaper changes. And you look at each of those areas, you look at like the culture you're living in and what would make sense, what's realistic, what's affordable, and then also what is going to promote some independence, so like what will help your child to eventually be able to do those things for themselves. And that's kind of the basic start. So there aren't really any hard and fast rules. There's lots of great ideas that people use, but it's really looking at those basics. Then as children get older, like in an infant community, which is starting when a child can walk till around 2.5. We talk about birth to 3. Most children are ready for a 3 to 6 environment, closer to 2.5 than 3, actually. Some hang out in the infant community until 3, and that's the right place for them. But I always try to kind of clarify that. And in that environment, you've got lots and lots of practical life. That's a huge part of what that young child does, what they want to do. And again, they're so interested in adapting to the culture, to their family, to their school. So they're, they do that by washing dishes and sweeping the floor. And I always joke that in a room full of toddlers, like a spill is a celebration because there's always the child waiting in the wings with the mop. Like they're like, I've been waiting all my life to mop this spill. So there really are no like accidents or mistakes. They're all opportunities. And it's, in a way, they're like these little Zen, they're like these little Buddhas because they, we all try to get to that place of serenity and spend some time with toddlers and they're there. It's like everything is a joy, So lots of practical life, lots of spoken language. So supporting spoken language development, trying to support them in being conversational and in learning more and more vocabulary. So this is kind of like creating that foundation for when they go on later to start reading and writing. And they've got this amazing sort of mental, like, I always think of like those like file, those old school, like, I forget what they're called, the file things when people would look up phone numbers.
A Rolodex?
Rolodex. Yeah, exactly. So it's like you want these children to have like a Rolodex of, if they hear that word dog, or if they see that word dog, it's not just one their dog that they, have at their home that comes up. It's hundreds of kinds of dogs because they've been introduced to that. And the same thing with people and with houses and with that they just have this really expansive vocabulary and sort of visual vocabulary. So we use a lot of things like language cards and objects. And then, music and art, and then food. Food is huge for toddlers. So they spend a lot of time preparing food as well.
Yeah, I've always been so impressed with the food prep. At the school I worked for 4 years, the toddler program, oh my goodness. Every single day they were making something, or, working with some sort of new vegetable, and they would my first classroom used to be right across from the toddler community at my school. And oh man, I'm again, I am so enamored with that age group, but they would always bring me their little treats, or I would smell like something amazing. And it's 2 and 3-year-olds doing that. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, and they don't, like, one of the things that I think sometimes people get a little bit confused, especially if they started in 3 to 6. There's a big difference between 0 to 3-year-olds and 3 to 6-year-olds. And at kind of age 2 to 3 is when it starts to shift, because they go from being what we call unconscious. And that really just means like they're learning, but they're not aware of it. They're not, so an 18-month-old would never say to me, can I have a lesson with the mom? Usually they just grab the mop, and if I'm lucky, I can be like, can I have a turn? And I get to sort of show them how to use it. The world belongs to them. They don't hesitate. Whereas a 3 to 6-year-old will be like, hey, can I have a lesson on that? I mean, I experience this now, and it's like amazing that I can say, oh, I'd love to give you that math lesson. First, we need to practice this. And they can do it. It's like that is not how a child under 3, that's not how their minds work. They're very sort of practical, and they're very in the moment. And so, things like practicing pouring, that's something 3 to 6-year-olds can do to perfect the movement. But a child under 3 pours, like it has to go to something, so it's like, and if you observe a toddler classroom, especially when there's lots of new children, you'll see things like children drinking out of flower vases. It's like, with water, I drink it. That's what it's for, and I think that that's where the food preparation has become, it is so integral, because there's so much that they can do. And then it has that very practical purpose of nourishment, and I will say to parents often, imagine you're this person who's, again, 18 months old, and you live in a household, maybe you're the youngest child, and your parents do things for you, and your siblings do things for you. And you come into this environment, and whether or not people have enough to eat at their snack depends on you. Like, if you don't make the muffins that day, or slice the cheese, or whatever it is, like, people don't get to eat it. That is a profound difference, and they're very empowered in those environments, I think, toddlers. And so that's one of the best things. We usually have a communal meal at the end of the morning, and like, we've never seen such beautiful manners as with a group of toddlers, because they do, as long as the adults really model, saying please and thank you, and you just, like, there's nothing better than a 2-year-old being like, thank you for these delicious muffins, Ella, to another, to an 18-month-old. But yeah, it's like a daily Thanksgiving meal, a daily celebration, which is really fun.
Erin, when you talk about language and spoken language with infants and toddlers, can you talk more about that? Because I think one thing that I'm often struck by with the way adults interact with children of all ages is that they have sometimes trouble interacting with children and treating them with sort of the same respect they would an adult, and they don't necessarily treat children like humans. They kind of treat them as something different. And I think I really see that oftentimes under the age of 3. And so how should we approach our spoken language, or how do we interact with children under the age of 3? Are there some tips or guidelines in our spoken language with them?
Definitely. And again, I think it goes back to that kind of like from an anthropology view, like, what is language ultimately? It's a tool. It's a tool for communication. And so it's a tool that empowers us, that supports our social skills and being able to live in community with other people. So we want to make sure that the language we're using with young children is language that will empower them, that isn't. So that means, like, for example, you might understand that your child, when they say, wawa, it means water, but you want to give them that word. Oh, you'd like some water, right? And so, it's not at all uncommon for, a newly speaking child to say one word, and that means a whole kind of paragraph of meaning, and so you want to try to give them the words around it, not go on and on and on, keep it fairly simple. But again, if a child comes to you with their water bottle and they say, wawa, you might say, is your water bottle empty? You need some more water? Let's go to the sink, something like that. So you want to use language to empower children. The other thing people forget, especially, even with the youngest babies, is that language is a tool for communication, and communication is always a kind of dance. So it's two parts. There's listening and there's speaking. And so I often see parents of young children kind of, it's like they're just throwing words out at their child. There's like a nonstop deluge of words, usually coming from high above, and you just see the child tune it out. They can't. So speaking and then waiting, pausing to see how they respond. And truly newborn babies respond to this. This is something that begins right at the beginning of life. Like, this is, something we do very naturally. So always giving that opportunity for the child to respond, however they are able to. And so it can be, with some movement or just eye contact, but you always want to kind of give them that space to respond. Trying to think if there's anything else. And then just really modeling, like, it's pretty ineffective and can be a major source of, I think, frustration for an adult when you get into, especially with a toddler, because and I can talk more about developmentally what's happening, but like, what do you say? What do you say? I just gave you this. What do you say? Rather than just like modeling yourself. So whatever values you hold that you want the child to kind of take in, you want to really model that at all times. So I think that working in Montessori has made me an extremely polite person, in a restaurant, in a store, I'm always very polite, lots of pleases and thank yous, in part because, it's just, it has just become a part of who I am, but that's something I do value, and it is part of our culture, and I do want to pass that on. And so, I've seen it with my own son that just very naturally he says, thank you. When he spills things, he'll go, I'm sorry. And, and I'm like, you don't have to be sorry that you spilled it, but I hear myself, oh, I'm sorry. I spilled that. Let me fix it, So they absorb our language. So anything we value, we really want to include that in our language. And then we also want to be careful with our language because they absorb it. So, be prepared to hear, whatever you say come back at you, basically.
Would you also say modeling your movement too? Like,
absolutely.
Right. Because they're visual and they're just sort of watching you all the time. Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. So, that's that. And this is what I really, really love about toddlers. And I think is that I am a sucker for instant gratification. And the thing about toddlers is like, there's no, like, they let you know immediately when you've made a mistake. They're incredibly forgiving, but it's like, you tuck one of those little tiny chairs in with your foot, and then you've got 12 children doing that all the time. And like, like I did it one time. Oh, that's all they need, So you really have to internalize that. And then, with movement, the N language, you kind of slow down too. You have to sort of, which like I'm a fast talker and a fast mover. So I have to sort of take a deep breath when I'm about to enter an environment and slow myself down.
Mm-hmm.
Just so that they have the opportunity to process, what we're trying to model.
Yeah, I have to say the mirroring or the modeling and them repeating what you do. I've definitely learned my lesson with some things in elementary. It's not as innocent in elementary. I think they know what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
But it makes so much sense, right? It's like they're trying to figure out how to be in the world.
Yeah, exactly. So, right.
Yeah, but they're these great mirrors for us. And it's like, how am I doing with this?
So when we first started talking, Erin, you talked about parents asking if they could still come to this event, even if they use a crib. Can you talk a little more about that? And I can say, like, we used floor beds with both our kids, even, that was 20 years ago. But with that younger one, we had a floor bed and then we had to put gates up. Like we did have to limit some movement to keep her safe. But can you talk a little more about floor beds and sort of the philosophy behind it and why we have that? Because there's like layers of reasons, not just freedom of movement.
Yep. Right. Exactly. So, and that's, I think it's very easy to look at Montessori for young children and think it's all about that physical environment. So what is Montessori? It is the floor bed. That's what it is, right?
Right.
With the floor bed, again, what you want is something where, children are, they have as much freedom of movement as possible. There's also freedom and some independence in terms of like how they fall asleep, right? So ultimately, like there are children, mine isn't one of them, but there are children who will like go to their floor bed and just say, I'm ready to rest, and lie down by themselves.
Yeah, mine were never those either.
No. And it's funny. I have a friend who has 2 of those and I'm like, that is not fair,
No.
But, I think when I look at my son and his personality, like we snuggle in his bed and we read books and then he goes to sleep and it's fine. In fact, it'll probably, like some of my favorite aspects of parenting. But, the idea is that there is this kind of independence. They have their own space. They have their own place to sleep. And they can get there themselves. And then you can kind of build on that in terms of usually by using routines. So, we've always had the routine of like, it's bath time and then we read stories and then we go to sleep. And so that kind of thing really kind of support that consistent routine supports the ability to go to sleep consistently. And then like for me, like my son, for his first year, we lived in a 1-bedroom apartment. And so we shared a room. And so now he has his own room, but he often gets up at night and comes into our room. So, it's like, sometimes parents are like, well, my child's getting out of the bed. And it's like, yes, that will happen. If you have a floor bed, that will happen. But, the children also try to climb out of cribs, which is quite dangerous. There's, children have been hurt that way. And it also, for me, I think it's also something where sometimes those containers, one of the ways that I think they are used that can be challenging is, and I understand it, but it's, I put my child in their crib, I shut the door, I turn on a noise machine or I turn my stereo up loud and they scream themselves to sleep. Like sometimes that's kind of what it's used for, to sort of like, they're going to be independent by doing that. And I don't know that creates independence, right? True independence. I think that, children do need some support around sleeping, and they sort of gain more independence with time. And so for me, the floor bed, it allows for that gradual move from being very dependent to more and more independent. It also really helps, I will say, because I nursed, and there is that time when babies are really young and they're nursing to sleep. And, how many people have then like tried to put their child in the crib, like drop them into the crib and they wake up, So I have found that it kind of supports transitions too. It's very easy for a child to lie down in their floor bed. And, for me to, sit, like, as I was helping him transition, he was in like a little kind of bassinet type thing. There's something we call a chestina, and transitioning him into the floor bed wasn't hard because I could kind of sit with him and then put him down. So, yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no. And I really just think like what I found with the floor bed too was, I really appreciated that, because my children never put themselves to bed. They would much rather stay awake. They gave up naps at 2.5 years old, which was heavenly for a 6:30, 7 o'clock bedtime, but kind of a long day otherwise. But I think I loved when they could wake themselves up and be independent. So sometimes they'd wake up and not come and engage with us right away.
Yeah.
And that was always really wonderful to sort of watch and see what they would do. And as long as the room is safe,
yes,
they're safe. With our older one, we didn't, we had a gate at the stairs. With our younger one, we had to have the gate a little more defined because she was a bit more apt to wake up and do her own thing wherever she could go. And she was a little, but we made the space that she was in safe, and we made, so that we could feel relatively comfortable that even if they woke up and we weren't, necessarily aware, they could be independent and do their own thing. And I found it magical to watch what they do, that they didn't always have to come straight for me or straight for my husband, right? Like sometimes they were just happy to be awake and do their own thing. And that's really powerful to not have to feel, I felt like, imagine if they had to rely on me to get them out every time they woke up, and how limiting that would be to what they could do and think and that sort of thing. And that's where I've really found the floor bed to be, a really great thing for our girls and our family.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it is, I mean, my son, and he's an intense person. And for a long time, it was like, even when we were in the same room, and I was right next to him, he would wake up and just like instantly want me, basically. And so then to watch that change over time, and, that there were times where he would just kind of talk to himself or find something to play with. It is. And it's like, what it's reminding me of is just when a child first starts to locomote, whatever that looks like you were saying, your daughter rolling across the room at 4 months old. But this amazing shift happens where you get to see what they're interested in when they can, you're like, oh, like that's what you decided to go for. And it is just one of the coolest things as a parent. Right now, I would say the last 6 months, it's been this incredible language explosion with my son. And again, it's like another level of, wow, this morning he was just like, armadillo. And I'm like, what do you know about armadillos? Like, where did we even learn about armadillos? And it's just this like, oh yeah, you're a person totally separate from me. And even though I have so much control over his environment, there's still like, there are all these things happening for him that, I don't control. And it's so exciting, and it's really neat.
So I have a question as someone who doesn't have kids, but was a nanny for 5 years and wants to have kids, in the future. To be honest, from a perspective of someone like me who hasn't experienced it, the floor bed seems kind of impossible.
Sure.
It just, you know what I mean? And so I understand why people are turned off to it, because the crib or the whatever, the baby container feels safer because they're going to be in there and they don't go anywhere.
Right.
But then I think about how it seems like work and consistency, but I think the payoff is what is worth it in a way, is what I'm kind of hearing from you guys.
Yeah, I think so. And I think the other thing is, and I think this is true if you work with young children, but it's also true as a parent. Parenting young children and sort of the expectations of your average working person, at least in the United States, those don't really go together, So like, I mean, we could have a whole other conversation about like toileting, and it's the same thing. It's like, a big challenge is that you're expected to basically, work crazy amount of hours a week, and everybody's very mobile in our society. So, it's like you're constantly running errands and out and about and all these things. And I think, to me, what I've recognized since becoming a Montessori parent, because that is so true of a Montessori trainer. And, I mean, like, I'm used to go, go, go. And you have to slow down. That's a huge piece of it. And you have to be very thoughtful about, your space, containers. And I hesitate to use the word convenience because I think, again, like, people are stressed, so it's not convenience as like, well, I'm not really interested in working hard. It's like, I need a little bit of a breather, so and I totally get that. But I think, if you're in a position where you can, create a space that's safe enough and simple enough. And I mean, for us, like I said, we were living in a 1-bedroom. So we rented a storage unit to put things that we were like, this can't, our space won't be safe with our child with this, so it took some serious planning beforehand. And you can just kind of slow down. It's such a beautiful and very peaceful way to live with young children.
Not to mention way less expensive.
It's totally
one you can buy even just a little crib mattress on the floor is what we used without even a frame. And it's about slowing down and about paying attention to that human that you're helping to develop, not, and it is hard. I mean, as a parent, you pick and choose the things that you do well. I mean, like I said, my kids never really chose to go to sleep. Like, we had the routine but even my younger one, it's always that second one, right? Like, but she did not want to go to sleep easily. I mean, it was a big, she never even nursed to sleep as an infant.
Wow.
Like, she just was but it's still the sort of sense of autonomy it gave her in that floor bed. And it's not that much harder. I mean, a crib gives you a false sense of security. Like, my husband, at about, 12 or 15 months old, his mom found him outside after she'd put him in a crib. He climbed out of the crib. He pulled out kitchen drawers and stacked them to the back door so he could unlock the door and get outside. Like,
oh my God.
Children are I know. Children are capable of a lot of things.
Right.
And that crib can give us a false sense of security, actually, that they at a certain point can overcome. So it's, but I think the big thing I hear from you, Erin, that I think I appreciate a lot is that they're understanding why we want to approach children this way is important. And then we have to look at what works in our family lives and be conscious about the choices we're making, recognizing that we have to compromise on occasion. So the crib and the floor bed shouldn't keep you from feeling like you can't be a part of a Montessori community or whatever.
Right. That's right. And I kind of am like, nothing's off the table because you don't know how you're going to feel. I think that's one of the biggest, probably the gift. I'm one of 4 children. And my dad said to me, oh, everybody has a lot of ideas. Because I'm like, of course I'm going to raise my child Montessori, And he said, well, I'll just tell you that everybody has a lot of ideas about how they're going to raise their children. And then they meet their child. And then they meet their next child. And that has a huge impact. And I was like, that's the most Montessori thing of all,
Yeah.
But it's true. It's like, you have to be prepared. There's a great, and I think Ashley Speed is her name, and she is on Instagram, is how I found her. She's a AMI 3 to 6 guide in Vancouver. And she wrote about how she was really struggling with the floor bed and struggling with, postpartum issues. And I was like, so glad to hear this, that it was a parent child, a Montessori parent infant teacher who said to her, try a crib, like try one and see if it works better for you. And it did, so you have to be willing to see, what will work, and and I think that's part of the humility. It's like observing keeps you humble if you really observe, because you realize like all my beliefs, are being challenged. But I think that keeping that really kind of simple environment and that freedom of movement for our family meant we had to slow down. And we just kind of had to be together quietly. It's like, I don't know. I find it to be a real gift to have done that. And the other thing, and Jamie, your story about your husband made me think of this, is Montessori talked about this, like deviations are, just when children, when they're not able to follow that kind of natural hormone, that energy inside themselves that says like, run now.
Right.
It's like pent up energy almost, it's this part of themselves that's blocked, and it can create things like lots of temper tantrums or lots of whining or things like that. And so, I look at like that story of your husband and this, like, look at all that intelligence for someone to climb out of a crib, to figure out how to stack these drawers, to open the door. But what would that have been used for had those obstacles not been in place? Like, had that person been able to just, walk out of the door and say, I'm finished napping now. It's like all that energy that was used to sort of fight this container might have been used in a different way. So I think like that's also, and I do think that contributes to a more sort of peaceful relationship with your child, because they don't want to be contained. Like, and that's, an indicator of this isn't great. Now, like my son hates the car seat and always has. And you still have to ride in a car seat. Like that's a non-negotiable. But do we need to go to Target right now? Probably not. Like it has made me pause and go, let's go for a walk outside instead, So it kind of, I think it's helped me to, again, as I said, slow down and sort of try to do things at his pace. And that is a much more, I think, joyful way to be with a child, because the time is fleeting. As parents of older children always tell me, the time is fleeting. So I feel like I'm really getting to savor it.
Yeah, it is fleeting. I always hated when people said that to me in the middle of parenting small children, where I'm like, really, because this feels like forever right now. But it goes fast, suddenly they're 17 and 20. And I think that really is the key. Like, it's something too, when I think about how that story has lasted in my husband's family for a long time, like it was striking and and that gave them a lot of thought and pause about him and moving forward. And I think that's what we have to think about all the time with our children. So when we see them overcoming obstacles of whatever sort, whether it's a crib or anything else, what can we learn from that, and how can we respond? And, what does that tell us about our children? I think that's really powerful, Erin, for us to think about, like that, even if we are using some things like cribs or otherwise, when we see this energy put into shifting their environment or trying something different, how can we respond and be responsive? And I think I can still, even with old children now, vividly remember the constant sort of, strain on me as a parent of young children. They need a lot. And so sometimes it's hard to be responsive to like the new needs because you've just got a handle on the old ones. But as much as we can slow down and pause and be responsive, that's our job, right? That's what we need to try to do, whether we have the perfect Montessori materials or the perfect environment. That slowing down and being responsive is the key.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And we emphasize that. I would say, like, at the 0 to 3 level, we always differentiate. Like, there's the physical environment, and the adult is the sort of orchestrator of that, right? And hopefully it's responsive to the child or children in the environment. Like, that's a true Montessori environment. But there's also the human environment, which is how we respond emotionally, how we observe and use our observations to make changes. Things like routines, which are so helpful for children, but adjusting them to the children, particular children we're working with. All of that comes from the human being. And I think, to go back to that issue of balance, that if you're like so drained that being present is difficult, which many people are there, especially right now, do whatever you have to do to care for yourself. And that's kind of like, I gave us a talk at a school. My son was 4 months old, and I was like, these are the 5 keys to Montessori. I just made this up. It was like, these are the 5 keys. Number 1 was sleep. And my number 1 point was, get as much sleep as you can for yourself and your child, however you have to do it, because you can have all kinds of ideas about how you want your child to sleep, but if you're sleep deprived, if you're exhausted, you will not be able to follow through, right? Or maybe you will, and you'll lose something in terms of like the trust and the relationship you have with your child, because maybe you lose your patience because you're exhausted. And it's like, nothing's worth that relationship, right? So I was like, just get to sleep. Then you can always work on getting more independent sleep, right? Or whatever it is. But I think so many parents have so much pressure on themselves, of how they're supposed to do things. And I never want Montessori. I always want it to be a resource, but never a source of pressure, that people feel like they have to perform it in a certain way, or, so it's like, if you can get enough sleep, if your child, I said food. So like prioritizing togetherness at meals. So if that means you're eating McDonald's around a coffee table, I don't care. And it's true, I don't care. But if you're looking at each other in the eye, if you're having conversations, is nutrition important? Absolutely. But the number 1 thing for a young child is that they, that those meals are associated with family and connection, and this all the social aspects of food, and then movement. Like, again, to move is to think for a young child. So often, whether it's by putting them in a container, whether it's by turning on a screen, or by saying to them, sit down, stop running, don't climb on that. They're getting this message that very healthy need to move is a problem. So, how can we look at our space and our situation and make movement not a problem? As a person who's always lived in small spaces, we deliberately live near large parks, and my son spends about 5 hours a day outside. That wouldn't be for every child, but that's what he needs for his movement needs. Like, that's what has to happen. So, making sure that there are those opportunities to move, and that, again, even the message, the opportunity, most of it is about that message, that who you are is great, that those natural inclinations that you have are wonderful. Your body is amazing. So, looking at your environment, looking at your attitudes, and making sure that that's what comes across. And then with independence, just this idea that I'm here for you as a young child, but I also trust that you are a capable human being, and whatever that looks like in that moment, or, maybe that's you're 2 years old and you really want me to put your shoe on for you. And I know you can do it yourself. So maybe I just hold your shoe while you do all the work, right? And that's me sort of saying, I'm here to support you, but also I trust, what you're capable of. I'm not going to get into a power struggle with you. I'm going to collaborate in order to support that independence.
Wow. I am even more enamored by 0 to 3 now. So thank you. Oh man, Erin, this has been so amazing. I was going to ask, is there a way, do you have any online presence or anything like that you want to share? So if people want to keep up with you,
I don't.
That's fine. It's not required.
I don't. I have,
not yet anyway.
Not
yet.
There
we go. Not yet. Okay.
Not
perfect.
Yet. I like that wording. Exactly.
Love it.
But I'm happy to, if anyone has questions, again, this is like, I can talk about this forever. So I'm happy to connect over email. I'm happy for you to share my info with your listeners.
Great. So if anybody has any questions about 0 to 3, you can email us, and then Erin will include you in that conversation so you can get the word out there. But thank you so much. This has just been a true delight. And
thank you, Erin. I just so appreciate the sort of the recognition. It's something I've always appreciated about you. Just that, like, these Montessori principles and how we approach children, they're based in like reality. They're not unachievable. Mm-hmm. They're not, it's not that we can't ever, compromise or think critically. Like even, I can't tell you the hours I spent bouncing my younger one to sleep on a yoga ball because she wouldn't sleep any other way, but the relationship was important, right? So it's okay. Like, it's so That's good great. To hear that, like, as parents, and recognize that at its heart, the Montessori approach to children is to be responsive to those individuals that we have in our care. And, and so we have some basic principles that we believe in, but we also recognize we have to build that relationship. I think that's just such a powerful and helpful way to consider this work, so that we aren't constantly living with guilt and shame as parents and even practitioners with children. So
that's right. Yeah. And that's the thing is, like, those little absorbent minds, they absorb everything. So when we are managing tons of guilt and shame, they're taking that in. But because they're such self-centered people, they assume that they're the problem, right? So I always kind of try to emphasize with people that the most important thing you can do, whether you're a guide or a parent, is find joy in being with those children. Like, that's what they deserve. There's a quote from the man who started Head Start, and I forget his name, but it's just, every child deserves an adult who is just absolutely crazy about them. It's like, that's what children need and what they deserve. And it's way more important than, as I said, furniture or, Montessori materials. It's just that, that connection. So.
And I think that's true all the way through a child's development, elementary and beyond. So thank you so much, Erin. This has been such a pleasure.
For me as well. And thank you for all you're doing with the podcast. I just think it's such a great medium, and you're getting really wonderful information out to people. So it's an honor to be able to be a small part of it.
Oh, we're so happy. Thanks so much. This has been amazing.
Thank you.
So fun. Cool. Thanks, Erin.